So I think that this presentation is the farthest afield from an academic presentation that I will give in two respects. One is that I'm going to be summarizing findings across a variety of studies that are pretty well connected, but because I'm doing that, I'm just not going to have much time to go into any of the data and methodology. And that's a good point to stop and say thank you, Gates Foundation, CALDER, IES, OSPI for supplying the data for much of what we're going to be talking about. And then the second sort of departure is should is still kind of a dirty word to me in this, but I think that there's some. I guess I go as close to saying should here because I think there's some low-hanging fruit about what the evidence suggests that at least Washington State might consider for improving the way that student teaching is happening. All right, so I mentioned that this is from a variety of different studies. So this is just some of the studies. I'm the one on the podium, but these are studies with many include Roddy Theobald, who's in the back, John Krieg, Matt Ronfeld on an experiment that I'll talk about, James Cowan, who's out in the ether somewhere, and some other authors, again, John and Roddy, and John and Roddy again. So if you want the details that I won't get to, go to the Calder website and you can find all of these. And they're a little bonus material, first time you'll see this. And we thank Natsumi, who's back at the University of Washington, for this bonus material that you'll see. Okay, so the data is mostly from Washington State for a lot of those studies. And in Washington, we're working with a consortium of 15 teacher education programs. And they have been sending information about their student teachers. Who are their student teachers? Where is student teaching occurring? Who is serving as the supervisor on the district side? So that's either referred to as the cooperating teacher or the mentor teacher. I'll probably use those terms interchangeably. And we're able to link those data, which go back all the way to the 90s for some of these 15 institutions, up with various state databases. So it's a nice way to get a picture of what's going on pre-service and then link it to what we see in service. And then I'll refer to that data set as the TELC data set, which is the Teacher Education Learning Collaborative. And then there's an experiment that I'm working on with Matt Ronfeld as the other co-PI, and it involves 7 teacher education programs across 3 different states. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is give you a little bit of information about the kind of schools in which student teaching occurs. So on the horizontal axis is the free reduced lunch profile, apropos of Corey's comments, free reduced lunch profile of the schools in which student teaching occurs. And on the vertical axis is the free reduced lunch profile of the schools where teachers get their first jobs. And if you squint at this, what you see is that you're more likely to have a first job in a higher poverty school than where you did your student teaching. So it's about 48% of the student teachers that we observe in the labor market end up in a higher poverty school than where they did their student teaching. 36% end up in a lower poverty school, and that does not add up to 100 because whatever the difference is between 48 and 36 are the teachers that end up in the very same school in which student teaching occurred. All right, so this picture is going to be important because it's going to come up a couple of times. So what we did in one of these papers is we looked at for the sample of teachers for whom we could observe value added, we looked at these relationships in a super flexible specification to see whether it looked like there was a relationship between where the kind of school where you did your student teaching and the kind of school that you ended up in. And I should say that it's important, and this is the caveat that goes along with every presentation you probably ever see at Calder. It's important to almost every presentation to not necessarily assume that this is a causal relationship, because what I'm about to describe might be about the match between where you do your internship and where you get a first job, and sort of the degree to which the experience you get as an intern matches up with the experience in a first job, and that's valuable. But it might also reflect something about the kind of places that are hiring, the student teachers, internally and whatnot. But the way that to read this figure is the color indicates the value added of teachers. So the bluer the region, the lower is the value added, and the redder the region, the higher is the value added. And the difference between sort of the bluest sections of the figure and the reddest sections of the figure are about 0.3 standard deviations of student achievement. So a large differential. The little X's are, and the pluses and the minuses are where there was statistical significance. And then that sort of semi-S-shaped line is what is predicted to be the optimum combination to get the highest value added. So the optimum combination between student teaching and first year job placement. Does that make sense, that setup? No, it doesn't. Some people are saying it doesn't. So I'm gonna try and say it again in a slightly different way. If it was super beneficial, right, to be in a school that that looked like demographically like the school in which you get your first job, then you would see along the 45-degree line is the reddest section, right? And we don't get it on the 45-degree line, but we get it not far off the 45-degree line. And if you think about this, this finding to me is not so crazy. There's it's well established that teachers get better with experience. There's increasing evidence that there are returns to like experience in a particular grade, for instance, so that it's not just experience in general, but the kind of experiences you have matter, and basically the more that you have experiences that relate to your current work, that tends to be better. And that's basically the idea of this picture. It is kind of interesting, and I guess I wouldn't overinterpret that. I drew the 45-degree line because it turns out that even if you're going to end up in a really, I'm going to slip by you for a second, Corey. Even if you end up in a really sort of low poverty first job, right? This S that shows the optimum relationship suggests you still want to have a student teaching experience with slightly higher poverty students. But it also shows, because it's, it sort of crosses the 45-degree line up here, that you probably don't want to do your student teaching, even if your first job is with very disadvantaged economically disadvantaged students. You probably don't want your first job to be in a, if your first job is with very disadvantaged students, you don't want your internship to be in a school that is very, very highly disadvantaged. So that's what this picture shows. Okay, I'm going to switch gears, and I'm going to talk about mentor teachers. Right. So that was about the nature of the schools. Now I'm going to talk about mentor teachers. So in a different study, we connect the value added of mentor teachers to the value added of of teachers for whom we observe value added. That's like 15% of the workforce in Washington. And we see a return to teaching experience, which is pretty typical. This is the red line. This is the relationship that we see for if you have a very ineffective mentor, 2 standard deviations below the mean value added of the other teachers in the state. This is the relationship which is statistically significant if you have an average value added mentor. And that is about 0.08 standard deviations, which is roughly equivalent to 2 months of learning. And then 2 standard deviations above. There are some fancier bells and whistles that we talk about in the paper, where we try to allow the effect of the mentor teacher we allow it to fade out. So these shapes aren't exactly parallel for that reason. And I'll talk in a minute about whether the worry that these are not causal relationships. So I think that these are important differentials, right? And the way that you might think about how important they are is to think about what happens if you have a very effective mentor, again, very effective, 2 standard deviations above the mean, as compared to an average. And relative to the returns to experience, it roughly means that you come into the workforce looking like a teacher who has 2 years of teaching experience. All right? So there's a number of these kind of studies that are relatively new that are going on, and this is not exhaustive, but I want to just talk a little bit about some of these studies that are beginning to focus on pre-service experience and what they suggest. So the first bar refers back to the study that I showed you with the heat map, right? The blue and red. And what Roddy and I did is we said, okay, what would happen? What was predicted to happen to student achievement if you had an optimal match? And what that means is that all of the teacher candidates are placed on that S. Okay, what would happen to student achievement amongst those teachers when they get out into the workforce? So it's kind of an upper bound of what the potential is, and it suggests that student achievement would tend to go up for those teachers by about 2% of a standard deviation. There's also a good body of research that Matt Ronfeld has led that tries to connect measures of collaboration in the school and the degree to which teachers tend to stay in that school who are not retirement eligible, and the idea is that tends to be correlated with these measures of collaboration. So teachers are staying in the school because it's a good environment, and so he shows that if you do your internship in schools like that you tend to turn out to be a higher value-added teacher. So these next couple of bars show the relationship between the measures of collaboration or the school stay ratio and what would be predicted to happen to student achievement if those increased by 1 standard deviation. Matt has another paper that looks at the value added of schools, and he finds that if you serve in a higher value added school, if you do your internship in a higher value added school, that tends to be beneficial for when you go out into the field, and finds slightly larger effect, and it's 2.5 standard deviations. And then I just talked about this this mentor finding, where we find that if 1 standard deviation change in mentor value added roughly increases the effectiveness of the mentees by about 0.04 standard deviations. All right, but maybe none of this is causal. All right, so I will say that in this last paper we do everything that we can with observational data. I think everything we could think of to try and tease out whether these are causal findings or not. And the concern is, right, that maybe you've got student teachers that are really motivated, they're go-getters, and they seek out really effective mentors to work with. And so it's not that it's the working with those effective mentors and what they are learning as a consequence of working with the effective mentors that matters, but it's just about the fact that the really, the go-getters who are likely to be good at teaching, whether or not they work with effective mentors, end up getting matched with the effective mentors. So we do some kind of back of the envelope calculations to say, like, what if there's, non-randomness in this match? How biased would these findings be? And basically, you can shrink the effect based on some pretty extreme assumptions about that kind of match, but you don't make it go away. Okay. But that is the impetus for an experiment, all right? So we're working on this experiment. ISTE is the Improving Student Teaching Initiative. And the experiment is a within teacher education program experiment. So there's two kinds of conditions. The first thing we're checking is this issue of field placement, right? So we ask teacher education programs to over-recruit potential cooperating teachers, right? And we have an algorithm that basically ranks the placements based on characteristics of the cooperating teacher and the school into a high or low index group. And then we get the lists of teacher candidates from the programs and we randomly assign them to the high or low group, right? And the programs do not know anything about which assignment is the high or low index group. The other part of the study, and I'm going to not talk much about this because we don't know yet much about it, but go to AFP and we're going to hopefully be talking more about it, is the kind of feedback. It's an experiment based on the kind of feedback that teacher candidates get while they are doing their student teaching. So teacher education programs seem to vary a good bit in terms of how they sort of handle student teaching, from the match that's made between student teacher and internship, and also the degree to which the teacher candidates do receive feedback at different points during their student teaching internship. Sometimes, though, I don't know whether to say oftentimes, but sometimes at least, the feedback, when they get concrete feedback, tends to come right at the end of student teaching, right? And so if you think about it, like, maybe that's not so helpful that you get told that things are mostly good, as you'll see, right at the end of student teaching, because there's not much that you can, you don't get much feedback, at least that's concrete, documented feedback that you can work on. We don't know anything about what kind of more subtle, non-documented feedback teacher candidates are getting. So that's really important to say, because the fact that it's not written down, the fact that it's not, documented in formal evaluations doesn't mean it's not happening. But our suspicion was more concrete feedback earlier on based on more observations is probably a good thing. So that's the experiment, is, having more structured feedback, at least 5 observations. The way you get the information back is perhaps a little bit different from the business as usual condition. And then the business as usual condition varies across all of the different teacher education programs that we're working with. All right, so the ISTE involves about 1,400 teacher candidates across 3 states and 7 different programs. I'm going to talk a little bit about the placement initiative, which is this randomization to internship, which is both school and mentor teacher. I think I've talked about this already. Okay. So this is the structure. Thank you. This is the structure. Man, I am so behind. This is the structure of these graphs you're about to see. It's basically a comparison of the responses to a survey of teacher candidates after they complete their student teaching, who are either in the high index group or the low index group, and these bars are the differential. One is treatment, intent to treat, one's treatment on the treated. Just focus on the blue bars, all right? Ignore for the moment the difference between the blue and the orange. And I show this graph to say the bars could be below zero, right? So it could be that the low index group teacher candidates suggest that their experiences are better. That turns out mostly not to be the case. So we ask about perceptions of mentor, a variety of questions in the survey about perceptions of mentor instructional effectiveness, all quite positive. We ask a variety of questions about the frequency of coaching activities, more coaching activities if you get assigned to the high group. We ask questions about the perceptions of the quality of the coaching you receive, again, mostly positive, the quantity. This is a sort of a summary of the survey results. Like, by no means are all of these things statistically significant, but on the other hand, it doesn't look like these results are anything close to random. So I think this is encouraging evidence that there's something real going on with regards to mentors. I'm a little bit wary because honestly, our year 2 results do not look as promising as our year 1 results. So I want to say that. But also I'm wary because I'll believe this if this ultimately translates into differences that we can observe for in-service teachers, right? So this is just all about perceptions. We're going to be following these teacher candidates into the field. We're going to be looking at their performance, their effectiveness, and their retention downstream. Okay, last thing, this is the new stuff. We collected information on the performance evaluations that teacher candidates receive as part of ISTE, and they get up to like 9 in some institutions, observations and feedback. And this is just the distribution of the ratings that they receive. And so approximately 50%, 44%, the first time that teacher candidates are observed, they're getting a 4 or a 5. Right. So that is mostly, those are words like highly effective, significantly above expectations, etc. Very few are given a low rating. And as you trace it up through the different observations, the green bar percentage expands so that by the later observations, it's something like, it's close to like 85% are getting the high ratings. Okay. I'm going to skip over some things. Okay, student teacher placements in Washington. Most of the student teacher placements happen close to teacher education programs. That perhaps need not be the case, but it's the way that the system currently works. So when you think about could you get better placements, right? You might ask, what's the scope for change? Here is the distribution of teacher value added for teachers within 50 miles of the teacher education programs that are part of this study. Here is the distribution of teacher value added for those teachers, again, with value added, that serve as mentors, all right? It's much flatter because it's only 3% of the sample, roughly. The difference in the mean is actually statistically significant. So the mentors are slightly more effective than the non-mentors, but there's a lot of overlap in these distributions. So I want to come back to kind of connect back to this, like where are you, who's serving as mentors? These are the actual numbers that we have that are serving as mentor teachers within same district as the teacher education program, within 25 miles, within 50 miles, those that are not. And then what are the opportunities to change the people who are serving as mentors within those same geographic boundaries, which seems pretty reasonable. You might even say that you could go outside those geographic boundaries and there could be some benefits. All right. So one standard deviation above the mean value added. There are lots more teacher candidates. Value added is a noisy measure. So, maybe you want to say, we're going to look for the really effective teachers. There's still a good number of really effective teachers that might serve as a mentor within a close geographic proximity to the teacher education programs. Okay, so this is an information panel. I'm trying to talk. Am I basically done? You are. Yeah. All right. So how is this about information? Well, think about it. One of the studies sort of suggests that there could be some benefits to the match between internship and first job. Suggests that if you get some information about the desires of teacher candidates, that might inform the student-teacher placement. There's information about the effectiveness, not performance, because that doesn't exist statewide in Washington, but the effectiveness of potential mentor teachers. It factors into this algorithm that we use to create the index for the experiment. And then lastly, to me, I guess it's suggestive that teacher candidates are told right off the bat that everything's good, most of them. That I think that maybe creates an expectation that that's the way it's going to be for the rest of your career. That helps explain why there's such a pushback against teacher evaluation reform in the country, and maybe it makes it hard to have sort of a growth mindset around student teaching.